An unsecured database is leaking thousands of fingerprints for tens of thousands of users. COVID-19 apps are spreading ransomware. Zoom app might be tracking you and sharing your data with Facebook. Researchers prove that a theoretical Wi-Fi hack isn't theoretical. And the dangers of selling your used hardware on eBay. All this on This Week in Cybersecurity with me, the Code Curmudgeon. So for our first story today, we have another cloud data leak. I mentioned last week and before that these things happen really on a weekly basis. This one is interesting because it's a typical cloud leak. There was a bunch of data on an unsecured system and people grabbed it or potentially could have grabbed it. What was different is that this time the data wasn't just passwords or phone numbers or emails or things like that. It was fingerprints. Now, when a system is hacked or data is leaked and your password is leaked or your username or your email or your phone is leaked, something is leaked that can help people log into an account, it's bad, but you can usually change the password at least. Hopefully you don't reuse passwords across lots of accounts so you don't have to change every account you own. The problem with fingerprints is they're forever. If your fingerprints are out there in a digital visual image form, you can't change them. So anything that requires the use of them is now suspect, and it's a problem for you for the rest of your life. And this is true of all biometric data, whether it's fingerprints, your eyes, your face unlock, anything like that can be stored digitally and played back. These systems aren't as secure as we'd like to think they are. So it's funny in this case that the company in question didn't really do what they should have in terms of encrypting the data or abstracting the data. They're storing images of fingerprints, but it's just far more interesting in the longer term that this biometric data that people have been touting as the way to get around bad passwords is also susceptible to being stolen, and perhaps the misuse is far worse than the crappy password. So something to keep your eye on. Make sure you're careful out there. And if someone wants your fingerprint, make sure there's a reason for them to store it. COVID-19 malware. This is a good news, bad news story. The bad news is that, as we've mentioned previously, there are lots of hackers out there working overtime right now, exploiting people's fear, and they're using social media, they're using memes, they're using file attachments, email, fax, fake phone calls, fake text messages, fake websites, fake apps. Everything they can do to take advantage of you. So make sure if you're going to try and get information about coronavirus, COVID-19, that you're getting it from reputable sources. In the US, look at CDC or .gov sites for the most part, and you'll have a much better chance of being safe. Yes, there are other safe sites, but if you don't know how to tell the difference, stick with the .gov ones and the CDC itself, and you'll be much better off. The same thing is in apps. There's all these weird little apps. And as I mentioned last week, there's a bunch of apps that are kind of ransomware based. You install them. Supposedly they're going to help you track the virus spread. And then they end up sending you a message that says, hey, unless you pay up 100 Bitcoin or whatever, I'm going to leak all your social media data. I'm going to leak your photos. I'm going to lock up your phone and all this other stuff. So that's the bad news. The good news is that a researcher went and downloaded the APK, which is the package, the installer for this app, and on reverse engineering it, found the unlock password in it and shared it with the world. So here's a picture of the actual code. You can see the password in it. I'll read it here. The unlock token is 4865083501. So keep that around in case you need it, or come back here later if you need it. Share it with your friends. The guy who found this on Reddit, the user Luca020400, actually put up an Imgur picture to show the code and show how, the password's just right in the code unencrypted. And it's funny, there's a funny thing on Reddit, I'll put it up here. A conversation, people saying, hey, the person was smart enough to encrypt all your data, but not smart enough to store the unlock token in a encrypted state. It's there in plain text. The response was that the code doesn't actually do anything. It's scareware ransomware. In this case, if you didn't pay them the Bitcoin, nothing would actually happen. So that's kind of good that it was either lazy or incompetent hacker. But again, the good part about this is be safe, be aware of where you're getting apps and data right now, especially anything related to coronavirus, COVID-19. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Zoom has become very, very popular now that everybody's on shelter in place. So people are using it for work, people are using it for home, family, friends, sharing things, being able to share desktops, see each other while we're talking, have big meetings with lots of friends. It's really, really cool. And as I mentioned in the past, one of the basic things to secure yourself when you're doing online meetings is making sure that you're using meetings with passwords. Don't just have an open meeting, you gave someone the link and assume that it's safe. Some of the apps like Zoom have secondary security. Zoom has something called a waiting room where nobody can join the meeting until you explicitly let them in. They have some options around making sure people have accounts, etc. So you need to do all of these things. But now there's a new secondary issue with Zoom, which is it turns out that the Zoom app on iOS at least has been tracking people and sharing data with Facebook. Now, the Zoom app uses the Facebook app for like easier login for people and probably some other stuff. It probably makes their life a little easier. But they are sharing information about when you log in, how long you're logged in, what kind of phone you're on, what kind of browser you're using, et cetera, et cetera. So this is in some sense very similar to what Ring was doing, sharing information about users to Facebook. And I have to say that this looks like it's a GDPR violation. GDPR says you have to have affirmative informed consent, meaning they have to tell you ahead of time what they're collecting, right? I'm going to collect the information about your browser, your phone, the day and time you're using this, why they're collecting it, and whom they're sharing it with. And in this case, Zoom wasn't really doing that. There's a vague sort of, we share some stuff with some third parties for advertising, but the explicit nature of this wasn't actually laid out in their privacy policy. So I'd have to say, Zoom, this is bad behavior again. This is not something you should be doing. To their credit, Zoom has responded and said that they've fixed this. So if you're on iOS, make sure that you update to the latest version of the app. I don't know if it's in Android as well, but, stay safe with these video conferencings, not just Zoom, and keep an eye on what they're doing. I tend not to use Facebook or Google login with apps because it does expose you to potentially syncing up different pieces of metadata about yourself. So just part of my cyber hygiene is have a unique username and password for every account. You'll be far more protected from things like this. And as I mentioned, make sure you're keeping these apps up to date for all these video conferencing things. Crook Wi-Fi vulnerability. I have no idea if Crook is what people are really calling it because I've only read it and I haven't heard it, and it's like KR00K, and then there's some other variants of it. But essentially, researchers playing around like happened with Heartbleed found a weakness in Wi-Fi that could potentially affect over 1 billion different Wi-Fi devices like smartphones from all the big players, Amazon, Google, Apple, Samsung, etc. So it's really kind of scary. And, when they publish this, everybody gets up in a roar. But the question is always, is it practical? Is it feasible? Is it easy? And if they can't exploit it, what can actually be done? This isn't a good news, bad news story. The bad news is that someone's finally figured out now that you can, in a very practical way, go after this exploit. So I put some information up here. There's some links down below if you want to research more about it. My point isn't this particular vulnerability today. What I really wanted to talk about was this attitude that when a researcher finds something, we worry about it for a day or two, and then no one does anything until somebody spends tens or hundreds or thousands of hours trying to prove that it actually matters. This is why I always say that software isn't software engineering. If you call yourself a software engineer and you said, hey, prove it to me, you are not an engineer. Software people, especially security people, especially development people, tend to say, hey, I don't see how that can happen, or if it happens that it matters, or it's not very likely to happen, so I'm not going to worry about it. Instead of saying, oops, and fixing it in future versions. I don't know that this was important enough to do a massive recall of everything or patch everything, but at least go plug the hole and have it fixed in the future. This is one of my pet peeves and one of my soapboxes, but this whole problem around cybersecurity that A, we can test security into our software and systems, which we can't. We have to build secure systems. And B, that when someone finds vulnerabilities, that we tend to say, well, it's not real until someone proves to me that it is real. The fact that someone had to spend however many weeks it's been since this was first published trying to figure out how to get in, they put a lot more effort into proving that the problem is real than they could have put into solving the problem. Do a better job, people. Those who are writing code, pay more attention. Use secure coding standards like CERT, CWE, etc., and just build better software. And don't take such a dim view when someone finds a security vulnerability. Fix it. Okay, enough ranting. Sensitive data found on a laptop bought on eBay for 90 euro. So this was a German laptop that turns out belonged to the Bundeswehr, and there was an app on it, and the username field was already filled out and said guest. So it turned out to be a security research company that bought this machine, so they thought, let's try to log in. So they put guest into the password field as well. And guess what? It worked. Of course, you knew that. Turns out there was an anti-aircraft system called Ocelot associated with tanks or at least tracked vehicles. And there's information about it there. Now, there's some question about how much of this was classified and how classified it was. But the point isn't so much that this particular data was leaked, but that you have to be really careful when you're trying to discontinue use of laptops, hard drives, smartphones, tablets, etc. Anything that can store data, you need to be really, really sure it's clean. And sometimes the cost versus the risk just doesn't pay off. Here's a computer that was worth 90 euros to a government institution. Do you think that the risk is higher than 90 euros? But if you do have to get rid of stuff, and even if you're not going to sell it, but just try to destroy it, don't think that just reformatting it or deleting it's enough. You've got to use some really heavy-duty wiper. And I know these things take forever. They take days. A 1 terabyte drive could take 2, 3, 4 days. I don't even remember how long it takes, but it takes a long time. But run one of these industrial strength wipers that does multiple passes, that overwrites the disk over and over again before you try to sell something, just to be sure it's safe. Don't play games with old hardware that you're getting rid of. And again, it could be USB drives that you didn't remember you put something important on, hard drives, computers, laptops, iPads, old phones. We're always selling our old phones. Is that thing really, really wiped? It's just an SSD in there that someone can read. So, just be careful out there with what you're selling. So with that, thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe, hit that bell to make sure you get more content. If you got questions, suggestions, make sure you let me know, hit me up. And as always, stay safe out there.